Clap again, Zach. Cool.
Okay, here we go. All right. In today's video, we're going to be talking about leading a student worship team. Stay tuned. Welcome to Worship Launch. My name is Zach Dietz. If you are not subscribed to this channel, shame on you. Just kidding, but do it. Go subscribe and hit the little bell button and stay notified every time we release a new video. My name is Zach Dietz, as I said already, and this is AJ Gonzalez, and he is our student pastor here at Evergreen. And we're going to be talking about leading a student worship team because some of you guys, as a worship pastor, are also charged with leading the student worship team. And so we want to talk about how we can do that effectively and also setting your students up for success as some of them may be called into worship ministry. And so, AJ, I want to ask you a question here. Some worship pastors are put in charge of the student worship teams, and that can be sort of difficult if you're not doing it correctly. And so I just want to ask you, what structures do you have in place for your student worship team that could help a worship pastor watching this lead a student worship team well?
Right. Well, this is an area of ministry specifically for me as a youth pastor. This is an area that I have learned it needs to have a specific person who wants to take that ministry on as really their ministry within the church. And but not everybody has that, and not everybody will just cast the net and find somebody who wants to take that on. And so what needs to happen is to create a culture of multiplying yourself to where you can do multiple things at once. And that is something that I have learned to be very intentional in throughout just myself as a pastor, specifically to student ministry, where I've got different people who have come in and taken that responsibility to make missions their thing and to make student worship their thing and to make camp their thing. And so what I've learned to do is to delegate responsibility. But as you do that, you got to create a culture to where your people understand the how and the why. And so the first steps that you would take in setting a structure like that up is finding somebody within your worship ministry who would be up to taking something like that on, and then beginning to really just equip them and walk them through the process. And so that's not something that's going to happen overnight. Sometimes that can happen in a few weeks, a few months, or even a few years. So I would just say be very intentional and know that to put together a student worship team well, they really need one person that says, this is my ministry and I really want to take ownership of that. And so before I came to Evergreen, I was a student pastor and a worship leader. And so one of the things that really helped me was to find those 2 or 3 people on my worship team that could help me in that area as well. And so as we plan things for students, whether it was a Saturday morning where the band and the media team came in, I would make sure that those people were a part of that process and they were a part of building relationships and building rapport with those students, so that when those Wednesdays come along and we're doing student band practice and I'm not there or the worship pastor's not there, that they already know who those other adults are because of that time that's been spent together. Mm-hmm. So I would say find that person that wants to take ownership of it, invest your life into that person and bring them along in the process, and then finally get to a place where you feel comfortable that you've multiplied yourself and you're able to release that to them.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's so easy, and our pastors talk to us about this a billion times, about not being a worker bee, but being an equipper. Yeah. And I think it's so easy for us to say, okay, I've got to take this on and I've got to do it all myself because nobody else can do it. And I love, you came to me at one point and said, okay, who on your worship team can invest in my students. And, you know, we discussed that and talked about several different people, several different options. And I love that you're not taking it upon yourself because you've got plenty to do.
That is correct.
On your plate. So, yeah, man, if you're a worship pastor and you've been charged with the student worship team, man, I would look on the people on your team and just say, okay, who stands out on my team that could invest in these people, even if it means for those people to step down off of your worship team for a time, or once a week to rehearse with those students or whatever. But yeah, equip people on your team to do those kinds of things for you.
And I think one big thing to remember, whether a student pastor who's delegating or a worship pastor who's delegating, something that we need to remember is the humility that has to come with that. Because as a pastor, we love being the guy or girl or whatever that looks like. We love being the person who gets to be doing the equipping, and then we become the hero. We become the favorites. And so when you begin to delegate responsibility and when you begin to multiply yourself, the good side of that is you are expanding your reach and how much effectiveness you can do for the kingdom. But that what also comes with that is you're not always going to be the one that gets the praise. And so sometimes we don't realize that that's what's happening there. That's what's keeping us from delegating, and that's what's keeping us from investing and multiplying, is that there's actually a little bit of pride there of being that person that's up front, being that person that the kids like or whatever that looks like. And something that I've had to learn in my life through the people that disciple me is when we get out of our way and take that pride away, then God can actually do more when we're not the ones on the front lines, and instead we're the ones multiplying ourselves.
Yeah, and I think, and you do this a lot better than I do, because there are things that I know I can do well, and it's harder for me to hand those things off, and I'm trying to get better at that. But AJ does an incredible job with that, and it's like he's like, of course I'm going to hand that off.
I don't know about that.
For me, it's there are things that I'm like, well, I know I could do this well, so I'm just going to do it. But
and sometimes what we have to understand is there might be some sacrifice on the front end, whether that means we sacrifice quality just for a little while as we're investing into that person and beginning to give trust over to them. And what we'll find is that the level of quality, as we continue to invest and continue to equip, that will be raised again to what we expect. So there's a little sacrifice there, and there's also going to be a time sacrifice that would come from guys like us pouring into and investing and multiplying. There does come time investment there, so there's sacrifice there. But in the long run, you find yourself with a lot more time. You find yourself with a lot more freedom, and instead of working 65 hours a week because you've got your hands in so many different areas, that might be the case at the beginning on the front end, but when you're doing it to invest and not just doing it to get it done, then when it's all said and done and you've created that culture, you find yourself sitting back and being told something that I was told this Wednesday. One of my leaders looked at me and he said, I do missions, so-and-so does camp, so-and-so does super summer, so-and-so does worship. He said, what do you get paid for? And he was totally kidding because he understands the vision of how we do ministry. But that's where you want to get to. It's not necessarily you don't have a job, but you spend so much of your time investing and equipping that you are now protecting yourself, your time, your health, your time with your family, things like that.
Well, and the cool end result of all that is I can go to AJ and say, okay, who on your worship team is ready? I mean, like, who can I pull up from the ranks onto my worship team, and like spiritually, vocally, instrumentally, whatever. But I can go to AJ and say, okay, or I can go to whoever's leading or shepherding his team and say, okay, who do you got? Like, who's ready? And it's cool because we have students on our worship team right now, and they're phenomenal, like incredible singers, but also the humility. And that's one thing I try to protect on our team is the humility on the team, and it's been awesome. So What do you have some sort of accountability structure for your team? What does that look like?
Well, again, I think for us, specifically in our ministry, it all goes back to the standard and the culture that has been set from the beginning, and it has to be in all areas. And so what I mean by that is there's a leadership camp here in Oklahoma that we are very much a part of, and it's a leadership camp that our students go to, and when they're there, they're not with their youth group. They have to go meet new people, and they spend the whole week with people that they don't know. And yet they return, and you'll ask these students that go to that, if you could choose one event of the entire year that you would go to, what would it be? And they would name that camp because they get invested into. I say all that to say our band knows that they are expected to be a part of that weekend or that week at camp. But in order to get there, you actually have to go through an application process, an interview process, and you have to answer questions about what does it look like for you to abide in Christ? What's your everyday walk with Jesus look like? Are you discipling somebody, and or are you being discipled by someone yourself? And these are things that we talk about all throughout the year, so they're not surprised by it. Come springtime, when they're getting ready to apply for that leadership camp, they know that that's coming, and they know that if they try to start that in February or in March, that we'll know, and we'll call them out. And so we've really just done our best to create a culture within our student ministry that if you're going to serve, whether it's on the student band, if you're going to go to leadership camp, if you're going to have the opportunity on Sunday nights to teach a Devo, our students teach devotionals on Sunday nights to their peers. And if they're going to have the opportunity to do these things, that there is simply a culture that that we expect them to be a part of. And there's a standard that we expect them to live their lives at. And so we pride ourselves as a student ministry to not be afraid to have hard conversations. And so sometimes those hard conversations will be Pastor AJ coming in and talking to a student about something that's going on in their lives. But really, again, it goes back to me multiplying myself. I've invested into my Sunday school leaders and people like that, the people that are on the front lines with our students, to create intentional relationships with them. So when there's red flags in students' lives of maybe them doing something they're not supposed to be doing, maybe they're not abiding, and we can see that in the fruit in their life or the lack thereof, then those Sunday school leaders and those disciplers, they're having those conversations with our students. And sometimes we get to a point where Pastor AJ has to get involved, but a lot of times I'm having conversations with my leaders in the backgrounds about how to handle each of those scenarios, and then they go and they have those accountability conversations. So again, it goes back to creating a culture where accountability is not a bad thing. It's not about getting in trouble. It's about getting realigned, getting back on the path that God's called us to be on, and abiding in Him in every area.
Yeah, and there was a wise person on my worship team as I was kind of struggling through, should I have a worship team covenant or should I not? And somebody told me, they said, Zach, people will go to the standard that you set. The bar that you set, they will go to that. Either they'll go to that standard or they will fall away. And if they fall away, those are not the people that you want leading your congregation in worship. You want people who are willing to do the hard work and do the hard spiritual work. And what I love about AJ's youth ministry is that our kids, man, are deep. Like, they know the Word of God. It's evident that they are pursuing Him. And yeah, you've got the typical youth struggles that every youth pastor deals with. But I love how you've set the bar pretty high with your students, and it goes the same way for a worship team. Whatever bar you set, they're going to step up to. And so,
right. And I like to remind the listeners that with that tough accountability and creating that culture, a part of that culture needs to be the follow-up and what it looks like to tell somebody, hey, because of XYZ or lack thereof, we, for this season, we don't think it's best for you to serve on the student worship team or go to that camp. But if you're going to do that, make sure that there's that follow-up of the why and what that looks like for us to get you to where you need to be able to serve where you believe God wants you to serve. And so we've told students no to going growing to that leadership, and we've pulled students off the stage that just wasn't living a life that somebody on stage needs to be living. And a lot of times what's happened with that is either myself or one of the adults that serve in our student ministry has come alongside that student and said, okay, let me spend some quality time with you and help you get back to where you need to be. And so we don't ever just tell them, no, sorry, you didn't make the cut. But we try to be diligent to those students who would accept it. We try to be diligent to go back to that student and then walk with them of what it looks like to meet that expectation.
That's good. Well, how do you identify potential worship leaders or musicians in your youth group? How does that work?
So really two things. The first is word of mouth. I mean, a lot of times if these students are doing life together, they're going to know a lot about each other. So a big part of how we find out is word of mouth, or just students coming to say, hey, I'd like to try out for the student worship team. But a big thing that we do is we go out of our way twice a school year, once usually in the fall and then another time in the spring, to try to do these Saturday mornings. And all it is really just a meet and greet. And we tell all of our current or hopefuls that want to either be a part of the worship team or the media and tech team, that we're going to have a Saturday morning where we come together. We actually have one coming up here in a few weeks where they come together and they just meet me. They meet some of the adults that are going to be serving with them, whether it's on worship or in the sound booth doing the tech stuff. And we just meet each other. We have a couple donuts. We laugh. We exchange contact information. And then that way we can set up either an interview time or we can get them into planning center with that information. And so we always promote it about a month or longer out, and we tell them this is a mandatory thing. If you want to be a part of this team and you can't make it to this meeting, the expectation is that you come to AJ ahead of time and tell them, not miss the meeting and then come back and say, oh wait, I actually do want to be a part. Because if that's the case, we just ask them to wait until next time, unless they're a new student or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, what encouragement or advice could you give to worship pastors who are in the position of leading both their student and their adult teams?
Yeah, well, being somebody who has been a worship and youth pastor, which I'm sure many of the viewers.
That's what I was doing before I came here, actually.
And as was I. And so, as many of you are in that role, I cannot stress how important it is, again, to go back and to sacrifice what needs to be sacrificed to learn what it means to delegate, and to not just delegate to anyone, because ultimately that will fall back on that pastor who delegates. And so we have to delegate responsibly. And the way that we do that is by genuinely investing into the people that God has placed in our ministry. And so again, there was a season in my ministry here at Evergreen where I had something going on Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night for the ministry. And so 4 nights of the week for about a year, I had something going on every night. And so during that season, I did everything I can to invest and equip as much as I could. And so now, being on the other side of that, we have a pretty large student ministry and student worship ministry. And yet I feel like I have been able to do more ministry than ever, yet I'm not as busy as I've ever been. I have a lot of time with the family and things like that, but a lot of that comes from sacrifice on the front end to invest and equip into the people that God has placed in your ministry. And then once you do that, once you equip and you invest into their lives, you have to be willing to let go of your pride, let go of that responsibility, and say, I trust you to run with this. And when you need anything, I'm right behind you. If you need anything, let me know, and I'm going to help you work out those issues. So don't be afraid to delegate. Don't be afraid to not be the hero and to give those things over. But when you do, make sure that you keep up with that responsibility of equipping them well.
Man, that's awesome. AJ, thanks, dude.
Yeah.
He's the best youth pastor I've ever met, and I'm not lying. I'm always in awe just watching his ministry. But thanks, dude. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Man, heed that advice. It's good. It's good advice, and learn to equip. I'm still learning. I'm still not there yet, but man, heed that advice, and I promise you it'll help you greatly in your ministry. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Join us next week. Thanks.